All right, buckle up, because today we're diving into a story that's got it all. Epic battles, cunning strategy, and underdogs who defied the odds.
And the best part is, it's not just some dusky history lesson. We're talking about the Persian Wars. And trust me, the insights we can glean from this ancient conflict are surprisingly relevant even today.
So think of this as your crash course in ancient wisdom for modern challenges.
I like that because we're talking about a time when a handful of, well, let's be honest, often fractious Greek city-states found themselves staring down the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, the Persians.
Talk about a David versus Goliath scenario.
Yeah.
Except this time, David actually had a plan.
And he brought his A game. Our sources paint a pretty intimidating picture of the Persians. I mean, we're talking vast wealth, a military machine that could practically blot out the sun, and an administration so efficient it would put a modern-day CEO to shame.
They were the big dogs, used to get in their way. And then you've got the Greeks on the other side. Independent city-states like Athens, Sparta, known more for, let's just say, robust debate, rather than playing nicely together.
Right, more likely to be squabbling amongst themselves than forming a united front.
Exactly. So how did this clash of titans even begin? Where's the spark that ignited this whole conflict?
Well, if you dig into the sources, one event stands out as a turning point, the Ionian Revolt. Around 499 BCE, you had these Ionian Greeks living under Persian rule who decided they'd had enough and decided to rebel.
A bold move.
Oh, absolutely. And to make things even more interesting, they even reached out to Athens for support.
And Athens, being Athens, said, sure, why not?
Pretty much. Now, at the time, this might have seemed like a minor uprising, easily crushed. But it was a huge miscalculation
Because
because it put Athens directly in Persia's crosshairs.
the classic mistake of underestimating your opponent, something I'm sure a lot of us have experienced firsthand.
It happens to the best of us, right? But it's a good reminder that what might seem like a minor issue, if ignored, can snowball into a much bigger problem.
So true. And speaking of snowballing problems, how did Darius, the Persian king at the time, take this whole Ionian situation?
Let's just say he wasn't known for his patience. To Darius, Athens' support of the revolt was a direct challenge to his authority and an insult to the Persian Empire. He decided it was time to teach those Greeks a lesson.
And that, my friends, is how you get a full-blown Persian invasion. We're talking a massive force landing at Marathon in 490 BCE, practically on Athens' doorstep.
It's a classic case of come at me, bro, except on an epic scale.
Right. So what do the Athenians do with the Persian army breathing down their necks?
Well, you might think they'd panic, given the sheer difference in, well, everything. But instead of crumbling under pressure, they decided to fight.
Gutsy move.
Oh, yeah. And this is where it gets really interesting. The Battle of Marathon isn't just some ancient clash of armies. It's a masterclass in leveraging your strengths, even when they seem totally outmatched.
Okay, so let's break down this battle, because I think there's a lot we can learn from it. What was the Athenian strategy?
So picture this. The Athenian general, Miltiades, he knew that going head-to-head with the Persians in a traditional battle would be, well, disastrous.
Makes sense. The Persians had the numbers, the cavalry, the whole shebang.
Exactly. So Miltiades gets strategic. He decides to position his troops in a narrow valley. This does two things. It minimizes the Persians' numerical advantage, and it neutralizes their fearsome cavalry.
Okay, smart move, but they're still outnumbered.
Yeah.
How do you turn the tide in that situation?
And that's where the genius of Miltiades really shines through. He employs a tactic called double envelopment.
Double what now?
Double envelopment. It's about strategic deception. Think of it like this. You intentionally weaken your center, making the enemy think they're breaking through, but it's a trap. Your flanks, which you've reinforced, swing around, surrounding the enemy, and boom, they're trapped.
Wow, it's like a battlefield bait and switch. I love it.
Yeah,
But hold
yeah.
on, we're not just talking ancient history here, are we? This has got to be relevant to us today.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Negotiations, strategic planning, even just dealing with everyday conflicts, the principles are the same. It's about understanding your strengths and weaknesses, anticipating your opponent's moves, and being willing to get creative to achieve your goals.
It's about strategy over brute force. Outsmarting your opponent, not just overpowering them.
Exactly.
Such a powerful lesson from the Battle of Marathon, and one that's definitely worth remembering. But I have a feeling this isn't the end of the story, is it? The Persians, they don't strike me as the type to just walk away after a setback.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The Persians, they weren't about to just lick their wounds and retreat. Marathon might have stung, but it only fueled their desire for conquest.
It's like poking a sleeping giant, isn't it? They might be down, but they're not out.
Precisely. And in this case, the giant woke up even angrier. Darius's successor, Xerxes, well, let's just say he took this whole defeat thing rather personally.
I bet. Imagine the pressure. Inheriting a mission, conquer Greece, that your father, the emperor, had failed.
Talk about pressure. This wasn't just about expanding an empire anymore. It was about pride, about revenge, about restoring the image of Persian dominance.
So Xerxes, he decides to up the ante.
Oh, yeah. Big time. What had been a large force at Marathon suddenly looked like a scouting party compared to the army Xerxes assembled. We're talking hundreds of thousands of soldiers, a logistical and engineering feat that boggles the mind even today. Imagine they even built a bridge across the Hellespont, a freaking strait, just to get their army across.
That's commitment. But this time the Greeks, they knew they were dealing with something different. This wasn't just a border skirmish. This was an existential threat.
Right, and it forced them to make a choice, to cling to their old ways, their rivalries, or find a way to work together.
Because when the stakes are that high, sometimes you have to put aside your differences and present a united front. It's a lesson that translates across time, doesn't it? We see it in the business world all the time. Companies that were once rivals realizing they need to collaborate to compete on a global scale.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that a rising tide lifts all boats. And the Greeks, they finally seem to be realizing this too, at least out of necessity.
So what happens? Do they manage to put their differences aside?
They did something that, up until that point, had been almost unthinkable. They formed the Hellenic League, a coalition of Greek city-states united against the Persian threat.
Wow. I mean, it makes sense, right? When you're facing a common enemy, suddenly those old squabbles don't seem so important anymore.
Exactly. It's amazing how a shared threat can break down barriers that seemed insurmountable before. And it's not just about external threats either. Think about internal challenges within a company or even within yourself. Sometimes it takes a crisis to realize you're stronger working together than going it alone.
So the Greeks are, at least for the moment, unified. But they're still facing an army that's practically bursting at the seams. What's the plan? How do you even begin to fight an enemy that large?
Well, their first major stand is one for the history books. It's a narrow pass, hemmed in on one side by steep cliffs and the sea on the other. Thermopylae.
Thermopylae. Even I know that name, and I barely pass history. 300 Spartans, right? Holding off a Persian army of, what, hundreds of thousands?
It was a suicide mission, plain and simple.
But why? What were they hoping to achieve?
On the surface, it was about buying time, slowing the Persian advance to give the other Greek forces a chance to mobilize. But it was also about something more. It was about sending a message.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of message?
A message that said, we may be small, but we will not back down. We will fight for our freedom, for our way of life, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was about courage, about defiance, about standing up for what you believe in, no matter the cost.
It's one of those moments in history that just gives you chills, isn't it? Knowing that these men, outnumbered and outmatched, stood their ground for something bigger than themselves.
Absolutely. And it's a message that resonates even today. We all face our own Thermopylaes, those moments where we have to decide what we're willing to fight for.
It's about having the courage to stand up for what you believe in, even when it seems impossible. But as inspiring as the stand at Thermopylae was, it couldn't change the outcome, could it?
No, sadly, even the most courageous stand can't defy the odds forever. A local shepherd betrayed the Greeks, revealing a mountain path that allowed the Persians to outflank the Spartans.
Oh, wow. So even in ancient Greece, they had to deal with insider threats. What happened then? Did Leonidas and his men just surrender?
Knowing defeat was inevitable, Leonidas dismissed most of his allies. He and his 300 Spartans, they stayed. They fought with incredible bravery, but in the end, they were overwhelmed.
What a tragic yet heroic end. So what happened next? Did Thermopylae accomplish anything besides being a stirring story?
Well, it did buy the Greeks some precious time. While Thermopylae was a defeat, it was a strategic victory in a way. It allowed the Athenian fleet, under the command of Themistocles, to prepare for a confrontation at sea.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We left off with the Spartans' last stand at Thermopylae, a story of incredible courage, but ultimately a defeat against impossible odds.
It was a pivotal moment in the war. Thermopylae might have been a loss on the ground, but it bought precious time for the Athenian navy, led by a general named Themistocles. This is where the story shifts from land to sea.
Okay, so we're talking about those sleek Athenian warships, the triremes, right? Rowers synchronized, battling it out on the waves.
Exactly. But even with their naval prowess, the Athenians were still facing a much larger Persian fleet.
So how do you win when the enemy has the upper hand in terms of sheer numbers?
That's where Themistocles, he really proves his strategic genius. He knew a direct confrontation in open water would be a disaster. He needed a way to level the playing
What
field.
did he do?
He got creative. He decided to lure the Persian fleet into a narrow strait called Salamis.
Salamis. Okay, I've definitely heard of this one, even if my knowledge of naval history is a little rusty. What made Salamis so important, strategically speaking?
Think of it like this, a narrow channel of water with land on either side. It was a natural bottleneck.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. Not exactly ideal for a fleet of large, not-so-nimble warships.
Exactly. Themistocles, he knew this. He used the terrain to his advantage, essentially turning the Persians' strength, their numbers against them.
A classic choke point strategy, right? Force your opponent to fight on your terms.
You got it. The Persians, confident in their superior numbers, they sailed right into the trap.
And I'm guessing things got a little, shall we say, cramped.
Oh, you could say that. The Battle of Salamis was a chaotic mess of ships, fire, and, well, let's just say it wasn't pretty for the Persians. The smaller, more maneuverable Athenian triremes, they wreaked havoc.
It's a good reminder that bigger isn't always better.
And that adaptability is key. Themistocles, he could have easily stuck with the traditional approach, tried to go toe-to-toe with the Persians in a battle of attrition. But he didn't. He adapted, found a way to leverage his strength against the enemy's weaknesses, and the result was a decisive victory for the Greeks.
It's a lesson that resonates even today, don't you think? The ability to adapt to changing circumstances, to get creative with your strategy, that's what sets apart the winners from, well, everyone else.
100%. So Salamis, a major turning point in the war. The Persian fleet is decimated. Their morale is shattered.
So it's over, right? The Greeks win.
Yeah.
Everyone goes home happy.
Not so fast. Remember Xerxes, the Persian king who was determined to conquer Greece? Well, he might have retreated back to Persia after Salamis, but he left a sizable force behind under the command of a general named Mardonius.
Oh boy, talk about a cliffhanger. So the war isn't over yet.
Not by a long shot, but that, my friend, is a story for another deep dive.
You've got that right. And there you have it, folks. The Persian Wars. A story of courage, resilience, and the power of unity in the face of overwhelming odds. From the valiant sacrifice at Thermopylae to the strategic brilliance at Salamis, the ancient Greeks teach us that even when facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, victory is possible. But remember, the real lesson here isn't about ancient battles. It's about applying those same principles of adaptability, strategic thinking, and unwavering determination to the challenges we face in our own lives.